Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion this evening called Building a Story Community panel. Building a Story Community panel. I'm Taylor Williams, the creative director of Guts and Glory GNV and the moderator for tonight's discussion. This is a discussion that was meant to happen in the spring as a part of the Story GNV conference. And due to conditions that no one ever needs to explain ever in the history of anything ever again, here we are on Zoom doing this panel together. But it's no less of an honor to be here with all of you this evening, and we're glad that you're watching this many months later. So to get our panel started, I wanted to have everyone as a part of the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll get going and kind of tell you what we're going to talk about this evening. Brandon, do you want to start, since you're next to me on my Zoom screen, but I don't know.
Sure. My name is Brandon Telg. I am one of the co-founders of Self-Narrate, a local nonprofit, which you probably already know if you're watching this because it's being live streamed on Self-Narrate's Facebook page. But, you know, what we do is we help people to write and share their stories for the purpose of personal growth and empowerment. And ever since my introduction to storytelling and its impact 6 years ago, I mean, I don't even know how long at this point, it's been a passion of mine to help others grow as much as I have grown through understanding stories. And a big part of that has been building a storytelling community in Gainesville, or helping to be part of the building of that community. And I look forward to talking about that further this evening.
Jaron.
I guess I'll go next. I'm the other half of Self-Narrate, one of the co-founders of Self-Narrate. Met Brandon. I'm sure we'll discuss that a whole lot further, but immediately through the power of story, we connected and formed a bond and knew we had to create something, like he said, to help people share their story, develop their story, and grow from that. I've since migrated from Gainesville to Dallas, Texas, but my storytelling work has not slowed down. I actually implemented more in the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that I do. And what I'm excited to talk about is how we utilize storytelling to break silos, build bridges. And it's always great to be back with my Gainesville family. So happy to be here.
Awesome, great. Yeah, it's so fun. These are the ways that we can still get together. Like, we wouldn't have originally been able to have you in the panel right back in the spring. So this is like a huge bonus. I'm glad you're here, Jaron. Alyson.
Yeah, so I'm Alyson. I'm a local filmmaker, and I do documentary work and corporate video, and so I've just been in this community on and off for about like 10-ish years. Just, you know, focusing on storytelling. And how I connect with you guys is through Story Cycle, kind of birthed that into the world and handed it over to Self-Narrate, and it's a really fun and unique way to kind of share our experiences in Gainesville. And I live in Micanopy, so this spotty weather and satellite internet don't go hand in hand. So that's why I can't see you all. And but yeah, it's good to be here.
Awesome, great. Yeah, we're glad that you can make it in one way or another. So the lightning isn't going to stop us this evening. Yeah.
Just so you know, this will be this is being recorded and being live streamed at a later date. So if you're watching this and it's clear skies, because it's rainy when we're recording it. I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's right. That would be super weird, actually, if someone was watching it at any point, really, when it wasn't a torrential downpour as it is right now. That was a good yeah, that's a good warning there, Brandon, so that people don't freak out. And I guess I should say, so I'm Taylor, and I'm the creative director of Guts and Glory GNV. So we're a live storytelling organization that helps people put their stories on stage in a performative way, but also always working through issues as we go. And so we're missing that stage time right now. It's really difficult. Like not only, sure all of you are feeling this too, but not to only just to give people the chance to do that and perform, but also like our family that we work with at the Woolly and at the Florida Museum and all the places, Cypress and Grove, all the places that we go frequently. It's been very difficult. So, but those families and those connections are some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening. And we should also mention that a huge, stronghold in the storytelling community in Gainesville is the conch that happens at Satchel's with Bill Bryson and Rick and Natalie and their whole team there. And so we'll be sort of honoring them in this as well tonight. So, but this panel this evening is meant to talk about how this storytelling community in Gainesville got started, and so we're going to go through some of the parts of that and talk about our connections and why we think this work is so important, but also how it developed. So the first question that maybe we can get started with is, for all of you, what is so powerful about story that it can build so much positive energy in one place? And this is kind of a two-part question. And how did your organization build that steam? So more about like how it started in Gainesville, as a movement, and then how you started individually.
So Jaron and our stories really overlap here. So Jaron, do you want to take the first half of the question and I'll take the second from the self-narrate perspective?
Yeah, so about 7 years ago, I was doing the math. It's been about 7 years ago, Brandon. We've been here for a while.
Time flies, man. It's 7 years.
A decade, sir. So so about 7 years ago, both of us were attending the University of Florida in grad programs. I was doing my Ph.D. in leadership development, and Brandon was doing his master's. And we were taking an interpersonal leadership course. And in this course, we were supposed to learn about ourselves as leaders before we go out to the community and have those who follow us and learn how to lead. So this was a lot of self-reflecting, understanding yourself, your foundational values, the things that make you who you are. Well, one of the big projects that we had to do on an individual basis was we had to stand in front of our classmates and tell our story. And it had to be at least 20 minutes. And even though we were graduate level students, probably had done X many numbers of elevator pitches and speeches and things like that, this was terrifying for all of us. We didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't know how to share that story, and no one had really asked us. But what we learned when we had the opportunity to actually execute that story in a safe environment where your classmates became your colleagues and friends, and in some cases family, we learned that from that experience, it was just overwhelming in terms of us being able to look back, see the challenges we've overcome. It was very motivational, and it really just had a strong impact on both of us. And from what we learned from even just the sharing of stories in that class is we both shared so many similarities in terms of being in the theater, of loving music, but also both of us being at a point where we really needed something like this to help us revamp and understand our identity and how we wanted to go throughout life moving forward. So we decided that we didn't want this to be something that just stayed within a classroom setting because we felt everyone needed this. So our last project was a group project, and we had to go out into the community and create change. That was it. And we knew what kind of change we wanted to make. We wanted to give people the opportunity to share and develop their story too. And we went to Turlington Plaza for my Gators out there. And Brandon will pick up and let you know what happened once we started that project.
Yeah, I mean, when we went out there, we went out with a sign that said, "Tell me your story and I'll give you $1." And what we found was that at least initially, people were a little bit hesitant to share their stories. But the second week that we went out, everyone who shared their story the first week came out and brought friends, right? We asked these friends who had seen us there the first week, why didn't you share your story with us last week, even though you came this week? And they said, well, I didn't think I had a story that was worth sharing. And I didn't necessarily believe that my story mattered. Now, what that taught us was a couple of things. One is that storytelling has a snowball effect. When you share your story, when you create a safe space to share your story, it may take a little while to get going, like a snowball down a hill, but it will continue to build and build and build, because people are looking for that space, that safe space to share their story, and they want to bring other people into that safe space, into that circle. And then it also taught us that we could not leave that experience there, because everyone has a story and everyone's stories matter. So if there are people walking around who believe that they don't have a story that's worth sharing, then Jaron and I, we looked at each other and said, we have to create a space where people know that they are cared for and know that their stories matter, even if they've never shared it with anyone before. And so to answer your question about what is so powerful about story, that it can build such a positive energy, I think that it's a connector. I think that you can't hear someone's personal story and then not be connected to them in some way. And we as people are looking for connection, right? Especially now I say now kind of like, now in the age of cell phones and social media, but now in the age of COVID too, we are looking for connections more than ever before. And storytelling creates that connection. Someone when you hear their story. So we just started from Turlington Plaza, we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, that is a key to this story, is that we did not know what we were doing. We just sort of said, we got some friends together and said, let's just create a time and space, put it out there on the internet that we're meeting for storytelling. Did it, and we got such a positive response the first couple times that we were like, let's just do this regularly, let's make this happen. And through just being dedicated and not stopping doing something every single month for years and years, it snowballed, it built on itself. Our community grew naturally bigger and bigger. So I don't know if that answers the questions that you asked exactly, but that's sort of how I feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you guys have you've told that story a few times, I would guess. And you have such a cool story, because it started out as something where it was so meaningful to the two of you, and so like just real in your own experience. You were kind of forced to do something that has turned into like a part of this movement, its own movement, and then a part of what Gainesville has now. So I love hearing that every time I've heard that from you guys,
Taylor, how about you?
Well, I was finding myself laughing at parts of this story, hearing it this way this time, because I also totally feel as if it was this very deep experience in some ways. And in other ways, it was like, I made a website, I booked a venue, and I made a ticket link, and it happened. It was like, it was sort of like, I have to make this happen some kind of way. And I was thinking, like, I was so blown away by the fact that it had worked at all, that I told a good friend, and I mean, really,
super
like,
relatable.
Yeah, someone other than my parents and my sister came. That was amazing. And my sister was in the show, so she had to be there, and I told my friend, like, we did our first show in April. I told a close friend in DC who I'd written things and performed with before that I was going to wait for some time in the summer. And he said, nope, you have to do it next month. You have to keep up the momentum. You have to show people this is a real thing. You just have to stick with it. And he knew from experience, and he was so right. Thank you, Charlie Visconage, for that. But, and then, before we knew it, in our first year, I think we did like 17 shows or something like that. But I think for me, I kind of went into it in almost like in the reverse that you guys did, where I came from a world of meeting with story because my background is in therapy and all these things, but I also had a background in performance art of writing and doing improv and storytelling. So I was looking at it more from through a performative lens, and then quickly realized how much people were getting out of it, even if they were comedic stories, on this really deep personal level. And I saw it happen within our cast and then with the audience or whatever. And so it was totally a snowball effect, but maybe like in the opposite way that you guys experienced it. And yeah, Gainesville is just a positive place in general, I think, where people are open to creativity and community. And that was enough for people to show up, you know? So I'm really grateful for that. But some of me feels like it was dumb luck on my part, as much as I had to do it, you know?
I mean, yeah, I mean, when you say like you just got a website and you started putting stuff on it and doing events, like that's I mean, that's really similar to Self Narrate's beginning too. You know, we our first thing we ever did was a meetup on meetup.com, which
Yes.
feels such like such a relic. But we created a meetup on meetup.com. This was before like Facebook events were like a guaranteed thing. Like if you set one up, people would actually see it and share it. So we felt like meetup.com was the place to do it. A couple of events went well, so we got selfnarrate.com as a domain and just like threw some like videos up there and look to see what happened. And this kind of work, especially if you as an organizer are willing to put in the work to do something on a regular basis, right? It attracts like-minded people. I think this particular work, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and Alyson, what has your experience been since? First of all, I'm fascinated by documentary filmmakers. I just think that is like, it is such a fascinating genre of person, shall we say? I wish I could see your face right now. But what has your experience been in what you do in terms of storytelling here in Gainesville? What has that experience been like?
Yeah, I think it's that filmmaking is definitely like a unique way to tell stories, and I definitely love that kind of medium in telling stories. I think it's both of your responses, both of everyone's responses of connecting with others, in the sense that I love that stories actually are essentially like bridges into other people's worlds. And so you get to kind of like cross the bridge and experience their experience for like a moment in time. And then also what I love about stories is that it's very personal. The storyteller, it's like very cathartic to tell your own story. And it's very, you get to connect like on a deeper level within yourself and find out these themes and explore, and I think that's where we really get to connect with other humans, right? Because we all have these, themes of tragedy and triumph and beauty and struggle in our lives. And so I think that's like those really good conjoining, connecting points. And in documentary filmmaking, you get to sit in people's living rooms and you get to sit, wherever they're at, really, and hear their stories, and not only shape it when you're filming it, but shape it in like the edit room and make it a narrative that other people will also connect to. So I think that's the fun part and the unique part of filmmaking. And like you guys said, like it all starts with just like an idea. And I think that's what I love about Gainesville is Taylor, you said it, Gainesville is such like it sounds like a quirky, creative place that allows for ideas to come to life and to come to fruition, and then also to block them. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting, and I'll try that. And you know, people come out of the woodwork and support you. And so I think that's what happened definitely with Story Cycle. It just started off as an idea. A friend and I had an idea about, like, yeah, let's, you know, share stories in a mobile kind of way. And we are inspired by StoryCorps, and how can we, you know, get people in this, like, unique space, like a little booth, and share their stories to a camera, essentially. You know, it's not in front of a giant audience. It's a little more private, so maybe people are could be more open. And then also, it stems from the idea of, you know, do we actually know our neighbors? The person walking across the street, what's their story? And the person that lives like across town from you, do you know theirs? So kind of like creating a little bit more space in Gainesville, a little bit more of like connecting points. So it's like, oh yeah, I saw their story online, and you know, they're blah blah blah, and that's really interesting, or I didn't know that happened in our community. And so that's kind of where the launching off point with Story Cycle was. And then it was just kind of like about connecting with whoever had a platform, and you guys all had platforms in Gainesville that were already built up, and people were already going to these events, and who can I partner with to really get this out there in the world. And yeah, it was a really fun experience. And I think that people respond to certain events and respond to kind of like the weirdness and the edginess and the fun part about storytelling. Mm-hmm. It's a fun experience for the most part, and even though some stories can be very heavy. Yeah. But
yeah, there's some element of it that's like voyeurism that everyone is agreeing to. You know, it's sort of it, and even when the stories are heavy, because everyone's agreed to be there and to kind of bear witness. You know, that's what they say in StoryCorps too. I'd been saying that for a while, then realized that like StoryCorps was already saying that, but that's exactly what we're doing. Is very, I thought I'd, you know, thought of it or something, but they're bearing witness. And I think also there's something really important that you said, Alyson, that I heard Judd Apatow, of all people, talking about comedy and storytelling recently, who's saying like, the more specific we can get, the more universal a story becomes. So it's like, it's both highly personal in documentaries or in live storytelling and the meetups and everything, that it feels like the more that people can share about their specific experience, more people can connect to it. And so it sounds like that's been a hope for all of us.
Definitely.
Yeah. And along those same lines, another question I have for all of you is, how can storytelling, stories, and storytellers create inclusivity, and does it always?
Well, I guess I'll jump in on this one. So one of the things that, as it pertains to the question on inclusivity, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I do a lot of work within diversity, equity, and inclusion. And right now, not only are we dealing with the isolation of COVID restrictions, but we're also dealing with a lot of challenges over racial injustice and how we show up for one another right now. And what you're seeing right now is, even though many of us are separated, we are still trying our best to have our stories heard. So even with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's a call to hear stories, to be seen, to welcome people in, and understand that this experience is real and it's happening here. Listen for our story. So I think that, you know, we have opportunities to break down silos, build bridges through story, through understanding one another. Like you said, when you're specific, it becomes more universal. Like, I think that's brilliant because, as people are sharing their stories, you also ask people to remember, like, share and use verbiage like, I am someone's partner, husband, wife, cousin, brother, sister, things that help people realize that they can find themselves in someone else's experience. And usually when that happens in an impactful way, you learn, one, someone else's experience, but you also recognize ways that you can be an ally, how you can help them to reach spaces of equity. And so with inclusivity, we have stories have the power to separate or bring together. But what I found is when you speak from the heart and you speak and listen for understanding, not for right or wrong, then you build that safe space where people can be vulnerable, where you can establish some trust and really learn how we can show up for one another.
I love that. I love the whole thing.
I've having done this work for a while now, I can tell you from my personal experience, like Jaron said, and I'm glad that you brought the word vulnerable into the conversation, because there was no way this panel was going to happen without somebody saying it at some point.
Yeah.
but the truth is that when you listen to people share their vulnerable stories about their lived experiences, no matter what that walk of life has been, you walk away understanding, you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, right? And if it is a lived experience that you have not had or will not have for whatever reason, you are better able to understand the effects of different systemic issues, things that you might be putting out into the world that you may not realize. You're able to see what it's like for other people, right? Because the reality is, I am never going to be able to walk around in Taylor's body and know what it's like to be Taylor. I'm never going to be able to walk around in Jaron's body, and you can't know what it's like to be someone else, but you can understand, you can have that empathy, right? So when some of the science behind this is that when you hear someone's story, mirror neurons are firing in your brain. It's this crazy thing where you actually, like, your brain starts exerting the same emotions and feelings as if what is being said is happening to you. And that helps you build understanding, build empathy, and that's how we make change. And I have a number of experiences that I think of and tear up, even just thinking about them, of having seen people connect through storytelling on understanding each other's differences. So my mother sat in on an event that we hosted where a transgendered person shared their story of what it was like before they transitioned and after. And my mom came up to me afterwards and said, wow, I had no understanding of what this experience was like. I always thought that being transgendered meant X, Y, and Z. And but hearing this person's story, I mean, I relate to some of those emotions and feelings that they described, right? And another time, this older white woman shared the story about growing up in the South and seeing racism around her, right? And how that informed her worldview that is wrong and that she should fight that and live an anti-racist life. And I'll never forget this gentleman who we all probably know on this call, Benny Torres. He comes up to me after the story is shared and said, this is amazing. I have to connect with that woman. I don't think there's any other scenario where I would make a point to stop and talk to this older white woman if she was walking on the street, because I wouldn't know if this was a safe person to talk to or to connect with. But having heard their story, now I want to connect with them. I want to build a bridge. And, you know, no matter race or age lines or whatever, you know, none of that mattered once I heard her story. And those experiences like stay with me on what the power of story can do, right? To build bridges of understanding.
Yeah, those are great. So powerful. Yeah.
For sure. I think also it's like you have to include like be mindful of people within certain different groups. Being inclusive of, you know, not everyone's story, not every, you know, not every mother's story is all mother's stories. So it's like, you know, like taking the spectrum of humanity. And I think that's really beautiful about stories is we get to dive into our own community and other people's communities. And that's what you guys are talking about. And we get to see the full, broad, beautiful spectrum of it and really connect with those various points and see a lot of the gray area in it and be comfortable and uncomfortable in the gray area. I think that even as a documentary filmmaker, you have to, it's not only in like telling stories as a storyteller, it's about like, how do you share that? There's like a million ways to tell one story, right? And so it's like how you actually shoot that narrative to do justice to that one character or multiple characters in that film. So I think really being mindful of like how you share stories in your different mediums is really important to be inclusive and thoughtful in like how you're perceiving the world and how you portray that in the world. And doing the character justice essentially, you know, so that they walk away and they're like, yeah, that I feel like, you know, people are actually hearing my story.
Yeah, there's a million ways to tell one story, something like that. So that's so true. And I like the last thing that you said too, where it's like having people listen to your story. I think the audience really becomes a part of a story too, once they are bearing witness to it and they're there. We don't know how every audience member in whatever capacity is being affected, but like all of you guys have said, our empathy can't help but to be ignited during that. And empathy can be like a superpower if we allow it to be that. But it's so amazing that if you're sharing that space with someone who's telling their story, you can't fight it. You can't make your empathy go away. And if you can, it's like almost concerning, you know? It's so, I mean, so it's so striking to see the differences within one room or any setting, you know, during the work that you do, like in the workplace, you know, these kind of things, like not everybody in that room is going to be exactly the same. And maybe that's even a reason you've been brought in to speak to a particular group, but you can't help but for everyone to sort of have a moment where at the very least we can connect with the emotion that's being portrayed in a story. It's not that you've shared a literal experience with any other human. It's that there's some element of their emotion or their humanity that everyone should be able to connect to at some level. And I think that's that seems like a power that storytelling has that maybe not a lot of other things do. I've never thought about what those other things would be, but stories definitely are at the top of that list, you know?
I mean, there's only so many emotions, right? And everyone feels the same emotions. That is something that every person shares with every other person. You know, take away all the details of your life. If you hear a story about someone who loved or lost or experienced hurt or joy, you know what those feelings feel like. And when we can connect on those feelings, the things around them, we get to learn from and see, you know, what's caused those emotions and feelings. But we relate, we understand what it feels to feel those feelings. And that's one of the most transporting, I think, things about storytelling, right?
Yeah. Right. And the hope is, Brandon, what you said, that if you can connect to the feeling, then the hope is that it will transport you to then try to understand the specifics around someone's life, you know, or around their story. So there are a lot of ways to that goal through story, which is really exciting. And I liked what Jaron said too about stories can divide us too. So we can start to believe a lot of lies that are like stories that we've built up over time that actually don't serve us or other people very well. And that's when stories can get kind of dangerous, yet in a strange way, it still shows their power, because they have the power to divide people when they're not based in reality or love or empathy or something along those lines, I think. It can be difficult in their own way.
Yeah, I thought I saw her. I thought I saw Alyson.
Starting to
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt her, but I did want to speak to that. We talk about the power of storytelling to either separate or bring together, and we talked about it, I think, from an internal perspective, but also a community perspective. But one of the things that Brandon and I will talk about often is the power of the stories we tell ourselves in terms of the negative self-talk, like you were mentioning, Taylor, how those become limiting beliefs, and we start to minimize the real things that we want in our lives, the things that bring us happiness. And a lot of times we plant those seeds of limiting beliefs out of survival in that moment. But if we're not being reflective and looking back and saying, hey, has this seed or has this particular need, has the story expired? Does it no longer work for this current operating system? And so we're talking about transitioning into abundance and transitioning into bigger and better spaces where we're starting to break those invisible chains that Brandon and I talk about in a lot of our workshops. That happens through constantly reevaluating your stories that you're telling yourselves, your thoughts, your emotions, but also filtering the stories that people are feeding you as well. And so I think it's just very important to remember to do that, because you'll find, sometimes you'll be like, that's a thought I probably was thinking in middle school. Am I still thinking that same way because of something that happened in middle school? I can probably get rid of that. I've probably outgrown that thought or idea. And why not replace that with a better idea that actually benefits me? We can be our own biggest critic. How about now changing the stories to be our biggest cheerleader, and seeing what works? Because I'm a huge proponent of we are what we say we are to become. So we have to make sure we're constantly reevaluating what we're telling ourselves and how we're feeling.
Yeah, that's so well said.
Very true.
Yeah, like Brandon said, we could each of these questions could be like its own hour-long panel. So we'll keep, let's see. So the next question is, what would you like to see grow or change about our storytelling scene here in Gainesville? Jaron, you can speak to Dallas or anywhere you would like to speak to. Where's there room for growth? That's a good general way to say it.
I mean, for one thing, I think the challenge is the challenge that everybody is facing right now. How does our storytelling community pick itself back up when we've been distant from each other? One of the challenges that I haven't really figured out in any of the stuff that I do is how do we maintain relationship with each other when we can't be in physical space with one another? because almost everything that self-narrate has built itself on over the last few years has been, at least in some way, involving us being in the same place at the same time, sharing and listening to stories. That's what we set out to do on day one, Jaron and I, was to create safe spaces for personal storytelling. And I still don't really know what that looks like in an era of quarantine, in an era where you don't want to be around each other. So, there's not really an easy answer to that question.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, the biggest challenge right now, honestly.
I agree. That's nice, simple. Yeah, it's really, I think there are platforms like this one that are a great, or maybe not even a great, but they are a substitute. But I think that there's, it's like watching, it's like if you want to go to the Hippodrome, but instead you're going to watch it on your computer. It's not the same. Or maybe like, seeing a therapist or going to your spiritual community or whatever. There's certain things like it will suffice, but it's not being in like truly deep community with people. That's really hard.
And even
Yeah, I mean, like even story cycle. It's like who wants nowadays to get in a box where other people have been in,
Right?
And like you can't communicate that. Like, so it's really difficult. And what I've loved podcasts over these last like 4 months.
Yes.
I think just like hearing people's COVID stories and hearing people's experiences of quarantine and lockdown is just like, that's given me such like a grounding experience and like, okay, other people are, just like we all talked about, other people are struggling, other people are going through this. And so I think it's just reimagining platforms and then, how do we connect over those platforms, and it's not the same as being in person for sure. Nothing will ever like supplement that for humans because we're such social creatures. But what can we do in the meantime to continue connecting with each other? And then when we do get back together, hopefully in large groups or even in smaller groups with families and things of that nature, or friends, it's like, how can we connect even deeper? Just like skip all the fluff and go straight to like, really enjoying each other and connecting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. I know, I've been in Dallas for about a year now, and definitely a little bit bigger than Gainesville, I must say. But there's the one interesting thing that I found about the culture here is that there's so many people who are what you call satellite folks. They're not from Dallas. They're kind of from all over. And so most of the way you make friends is you find someone else who moved here around the same time and just happen to be exploring, And so the first thing you're doing is sharing a story of how you got here, what brought you here. So once, quarantine ends, maybe, we'll figure out ways to reconnect. I do think that we even see a part of the need, the humanistic need for connection, in the fact that it's hard for us to stay disciplined in staying in the house. The moment we think outside is safe, we flurry to the first beach and just be around people, And so I think that in some way speaks to our want and longing for connection or to be around people. So I think we're going to see the need still be there, but I think we're going to see very innovative ways to stay 6 feet apart, but still be allowed to be in these spaces. So definitely looking forward to figuring that out. But for now, I'm staying in the house.
Both are true, right?
Mm.
I think, you had mentioned, where we could see things kind of grow. Um, while I was in Gainesville, one of the things that I noticed too is, apparently there's a college there called the University of Florida, and it's pretty big. So when you think about the fact that Gainesville is considered a college town, but a fairly small town with such a large university, every 4 to 6 years, you have approximately 25,000 plus new students who are not from that town in that area, right? So you have thousands of new experiences that come into this town for 4 to 6 years. Some stay, many leave, and they never connect in a deeper way outside the University of Florida.
Yeah.
Now, UF does a good job of building a hub where you can be on campus and kind of have your needs met there. But there are a lot of opportunities, especially during your developmental ages, those what defining 20s is what they call
The defining decade.
there
Yeah.
it is, defining decade to learn from other experiences. And I think that if there's a way to continue to build deeper connections with the students that go to the university, to bring those innovative ideas and those progressive ideas into the community to kind of help drive and push equity. And we see that happen. But I just think that there's a huge opportunity for Gainesville to learn from those students who are there, but also for the students to learn from the people within Gainesville and their experiences also.
Yeah. The bridges you were talking about building, that I think that's a great example there of sometimes I'm totally shocked. Like I grew up in Gainesville, and then was an undergrad and graduate student. And it was so interesting to interact with people who had come, into Gainesville, and they're like, oh, there's nothing to do. Well, I may have felt that way too, but because I was born and raised here, I knew that that wasn't true at all. And then I had all these like family memories and teenage memories and getting into college memories and all these things. And so I think it's a huge opportunity, and for, like you said too, Jaron, for both parts of the community, it's a huge opportunity. Yeah, it's a
I
great
think
point.
that's a great point. I've seen some overlap. I've seen some students get involved in the storytelling community, and when they do, it's like fireworks and amazing things happen, but there just aren't that many, and there's a lot of reasons for why that could be, or why that is an issue. But I think that's a really good point. I would add to something that I feel like we were starting to get some traction on before the world shut down, was branding our town for what it is, and that is a storytelling community. We are extremely lucky, and I think it shows who we are as a community to have such a large number of amazing storytellers, so much so that it can support more than 3 organizations regularly doing storytelling events. And I say more than because we as a sort of I would say the downtown storytelling community, us, the Conch, and us being self-narrate, the Conch and Guts and Glory, like we tend to work together. But there are others. There's like, I want to say the Florida Writers Association. There's Toastmasters. There is
Dope and Mike.
Dope and Mike. Yes, thank you. And there are others even still beyond that. And the fact that our community supports all of these groups, and honestly, there's a lot of people that go to one and none of the others.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Tells you that this is a storytelling community. And I don't know necessarily what it takes for the city to brand itself that way and to really take on the ownership of like buying into that in the same way that Austin is Keep Austin Weird, or like Nashville's like a music town, or whatever, whatever kind of correlation to a city and an idea that you can come up with. But I mean, I feel that is, at the very least, Gainesville is the like #1 storytelling town in the state of Florida. So what is keeping us from like owning that, really?
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I mean, I guess I just never like, you know, until you brought that up, I didn't really think of it as like, you know, Gainesville and storytelling. I mean, we have a huge community here for that for sure, but like as synonymous as, you know, keep Austin weird, and, you know, but I think that some branding efforts of keep on Austin weird is the community themselves like doing weird stuff and completely and 100% supporting it, you know, and they take pride in it, and you know, you can do the wackiest things and it's completely acceptable because that it comes from like a grassroots instead of, you know, the city saying like, oh, let's keep it weird, you know. It's like the people who want to actually keep it weird. So I think, I don't know, maybe Gainesville, if it catches on, you know, with the people who live here and we can, you know, harness it in some way, I think that would be a really, really neat growth experience. And then definitely with the students, I mean, yeah, Jaron has a great point there. Some of my students, they'd never go to certain spaces, you know, whether it's because they don't have a car or anything like that. But even like downtown's walkable, and I'll be like, let's go, you know, film this interview in the Thomas Center, and they'll be like, what's the Thomas Center? Where they, you know, they've never been in certain buildings, and so just connecting them to like Gainesville gems, and you know, I guess figuring out a way where you know, people can connect in that capacity would be fantastic, and expand the spaces that we tell our stories in.
I think some of the venues are part of what make the storytelling community what they are too, like the example of Heartwood Soundstage being the home for Story Summit, where we all come together and it's like Gainesville's best night of storytelling. You know, that's almost its own, I mean, Heartwood is totally the home for that. And so I think we have such support from the venues who are excited about what we're doing. And then the venues themselves have followings, you know, that are totally independent of storytelling. Maybe at Heartwood, you know, it's huge music fans, obviously, but there might be different venues that go for different things. And so we get to borrow those crowds, and it just builds the community in that, or, you know, combines them.
And thank you. I want to totally shout out, since we're talking about a storytelling community here, I want to shout out the Bull, who has hosted self-narrate events consistently for years. You know, they create an amazing feel of a space. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's intentional. So thank you to the Bull, and thank you to Satchels for hosting the Conch for all this time. You know, the Conch has been around longer than we have. And Cypress and Grove and Heartwood and the Woolly as spaces that have regularly hosted storytelling. We really couldn't have a storytelling community without places to meet, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go, Jaron.
It just I don't know, I'm sitting here going, I haven't been in Gainesville in a while, so all I'm thinking, like, man, when you mentioned the Bull, I'm thinking of all the memories that I've had in that space and in that place. And it's like the businesses benefit because whenever I go back to Gainesville, I'm going back to the Bull because I have so many memories of stories I've heard there, of emotions I've experienced in the audience. So it's almost it's a bartering where we're allowed to show up and help curate stories, but they allow us to curate experiences which we all benefit from. You know, we have people who may have come into the Bull to grab a beer after work and stumbled upon storytelling, or some came because they knew storytelling was there, and so they said, I think I'll buy a beer too. So you need both of the, you know, everyone that we mentioned, that to create that environment where we have the opportunity to show up in these spaces with limited resources. Sometimes you just show up and they already have the resources there for you. And so I think that's part of what makes Gainesville so special.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. That's for sure.
Yeah, like basically, going back to the idea of our community owning up to what it is as a storytelling community, there's definitely an economic reciprocity there. There is an economic benefit to to us being a storytelling community and buying into together that is our identity, because it pulls people in, it pulls dollars in. You talked about the bull, people buying drinks, staying after, buying more drinks, same at the Woolly, and other spaces. So there's definitely, I think there's something there, it's not, that benefits everybody involved all the way up and down the chain,
I basically think you're really selling it, and the city of Gainesville should somehow dub
Lauren
us.
Poe, are you on the stream?
Right. No, exactly.
Anybody who can make a decree?
Right.
If you print it on a shirt, it might happen.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's
Hey,
true.
listen,
Just make a website.
We started
Yeah.
giving away these bumper stickers, and they started showing up everywhere. And
They're
now,
everywhere.
like, do it. I say just put on a shirt, put on a website, and say, hey.
I mean, tying it back together, that's how we all got to be here today, I suppose.
Exactly. Why would we choose any other method? Seemed to work so well.
I think that sort of ties it into another question that was posed when we were talking together about what we would be talking about tonight, and that's the ways in which we've collaborated. And one of the things that I think is so cool when we talk about our storytelling community is that people often, capital P people, often think that when there's multiple practitioners of something in an area, that means competition, right? And I think that sort of, not to get too into it, but like our capitalistic view is that when there's more than one of something, that there's not enough resources to go around, and so there's naturally competition. But that is not how our community operates at all. Our community, with more practitioners, with more organizations and entities, it is a building on. It is an adding to. And again, bringing in the conch and all these others. Our community, it benefits from all of us being here, even if we didn't work together, which we do work together quite regularly. But even if we didn't, having the outlet on different nights of the week, different spaces that some people may feel more or less comfortable in, right? It benefits the storytelling community as a whole to have all of us here. But I'm so glad that we do not see each other as competition and see each other as partners, really, in building this thing that is a storytelling community. So I'm really grateful that that's the relationship that we have. But I think that we as storytellers are inclined to that, right? We're inclined to connection,
Yeah. That's so true. I almost look forward to people asking me that question. If we're in, competition with each other, I'm like, well, let me tell you more how we're in cahoots with each other. So, and really, we didn't even fully realize that when we started. It wasn't like we were thinking, okay, you guys have an organization that's like this, and then we'll do this other thing, and you guys, because we started at different times, and it's just worked out so beautifully how we all have our own little like niche thing and our different evenings, and that we have a way of coming together through Story Summit at Heartwood. And then we have people like Alyson who are doing things that like we don't do at all, which is putting the story to film and making them shiny and presentable and complete.
Right. That's true. Yeah, I think yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Good.
That's great. I think, yeah, it's really exciting to see people collaborate, and it's not like a pie that's divvied up. You know, here's your slice and here's your slice. It's, you know, and there's only so much to go around. It's very expandable and expansive as much as you want it to be. And I think what I love about communities that are really successful in connecting people together is that a lot of people say yes to each other. Yeah, you're like, yes, and how can I help? And I think just like those words are really transformative and collaborative, and a lot of really, really cool things can happen out of it.
Yeah. It's a great description. It's not a pie that can be divvied up and there's only so much. Yeah. It's expansive. Yeah, that's a good, I think that's even a good summary. And yeah. We could like just not sleep at all and just keep talking about it. But I feel like this is a good, well-rounded discussion of our humble beginnings. And it's even fun to find when we share in these spaces that are, you know, we're telling stories right now about stories, and that kind of how, you know, our origin stories are some of the most important ones of why we're still doing this right now, and why we bother, and why Story GNV was even ever a conference in person or via live stream on Zoom. So I do think that we'll bounce back from it. You know, it's going to be hard, but maybe it will make it more precious when we can be back together in person and hug each other before and after the stories are told.
I mean, when we were talking earlier about connection, we all, no matter who you are, we all have a shared story now, you know?
Oh,
and I think
so
that not
true.
just are we going to be longing for that interpersonal connection, which we cannot safely have right now, but we also have a something that connects us all, and you can just say, hey, what was this experience like for you, because here's what it was like for me, you know.
Yeah.
And I bet it's probably not that far off.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you guys for making Story GNV what it is, or that it's a thing at all, for what it is, and for, you know, making this something that we can all still be a part of, even when it seemed like so many things were kind of just falling to the wayside in the spring. So it's great to have this now. Thank you.
Hey, it was lovely talking with you all. I love each and every one of you, so I'm really glad that we got to share this time. And you know, hopefully if somebody's out there watching, you got something out of it. So
yeah, let us know. Right.
And thanks for hosting, Taylor. Always a great host.
Oh, thank you.
So
thank
really
you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Great. Well, good to be with all of you.
Yeah. Likewise.
Mm.